Hey folks, it's Kieran Barker here, and I wanted to create a quick video tutorial to go along with my latest blog post, which is so I had the idea to, if you haven't seen it before, this is Dave Rupert's nutrition cards for accessible components, and basically what it is it kind of tells you when you're making some common components, it gives you the expected keyboard behaviors, focus expectations, labeling, and what elements you should use um, in order to make it as accessible as possible, rather than just using a bunch of divs with click handlers, which is sinful. So I wrote a blog post last week saying that I was going to go through all of these and try and build them from scratch. And the first one on the list is an accordion. So I guess I'll show you first what we're going to be building, because I've already built it out. So this is the final product. So it's an accordion in which I wanted it so that you always have to have a panel open. So you can see this is kind of disabled. You can't enable it. And yeah, and only one panel can be open at a time. And if I tab through, you can use the keyboard functionality. So you can use the shift keys, and you can also use the arrow keys when the headers are in focus, which is mentioned. It's mentioned over here on the keyboard expectations. Let's see. So to show you that we've met everything. Let's see, headers should have visible keyboard focus state. Yeah, so you can see that. I just used the default, I didn't modify it. So it may look different depending on the browser. This is Microsoft Edge. Let's see, all keyboard interactions relate to when the headers are focused. Yep, so for example, the up and down keys, they only cycle between these headers when you are focused on a header. If you're not, so like for example, if I tab to one of these links and press up and down keys, nothing happens, so that's good. Each accordion header title is contained in an element with a role button, e.g. native button element. So we have that, I will show you. So yeah, so each one is wrapped in an article element, and then you've got an H2 for the section title, and then the button element, which is what was just specified. And then it says each accordion header button is wrapped with a role heading set to the appropriate level. HTML heading elements can be used. So yeah, rather than using the ARIA level, I've just used the native element here. So we've got H2s because the top level is an H1. So then you should always use them in order. So the next one is an H2. So that's good. Let's see, only one button element is allowed in the heading. Other visual elements must be outside the heading element. Well, that's fine. We haven't got anything else. If the accordion panel is visible, the header button element should have ARIA expanded set to true. If it's not visible, ARIA expanded is set to false. So you can see that happening here. So this first panel is currently visible, right? And ARIA expanded is set to true, which is good. And if I switch to another one, the content is now hidden and ARIA expanded is set to false, which is good. So that's that. I'll touch on this ARIA disabled later. Accordion header buttons have ARIA controls set to the ID of the associated accordion panel content. So for example, we've got, for this first one, ARIA controls is content 0, and then the paragraph content has the ID content 0 as well. So those two are linked. So that, I think, shows you what we're building and goes over the expectations that we're sort of going by. So I guess I'll kind of go through my thought process, because as I said, I've obviously already built this. So the first thing, if I show you the HTML, is we're using progressive enhancement, which means we want this to work and still be a good experience without JavaScript. So if the JavaScript fails to load for whatever reason, maybe there's a network error, or something like that. Or maybe someone has JavaScript disabled, which is rare, but it does happen. So we have a section of article elements, which are a semantic choice for this. And you've literally just got some headings and paragraphs. So if I show you quickly, if I open my developer tools here and actually disable JavaScript and then reload the page. So you see now we don't have there is no accordion now. It's just a plain set of sections, well, article elements specifically, but that's that. That's still a good experience. But when JavaScript is enabled, then it gets enhanced into this accordion, which is what we want. So that's the first thing to mention. I guess I should also mention in our HTML, I've added this data accordion attribute to this outer div. So this is just like a container div for the entire accordion. And I'll use this attribute to select it in the HTML. So that's good. So the first thing we need to do from our script is actually to kind of grab each of these article elements and convert it into one of these panels. And obviously we know we need this button inside the H2 rather than what we start with is just the text. So that's kind of the main thing we need to do. And as it mentioned in these accessibility expectations, we kind of need to have all these attributes and like we need an ID on the content that matches up with this ARIA controls attribute. And we also, we only want the first panel to be visible by default. So we need to think about that as well. So firstly, at the top of the script, we use the query selector method using that data accordion attribute that I mentioned to select this entire outer div element. So that's like, let me move this. So you can kind of see what it's referencing. It's this entire section that contains the accordion. And then we use the children property, which as it says here in my, I don't know what you call this, my IntelliSense, I think it is. Yeah, that's returning all the direct children of that div. So that means all these article elements, those are the direct children. Now that returns, as it shows you here, that actually returns an HTML collection object, which is fine, but we are actually going to need to be using some array methods on this. So I'm using the spread syntax, which is what these kind of 3 dots are here, to convert that into an array. So now the type of this is actually an array of element objects, which is nice. And then we have this create panel function, which down the bottom of the script, when I actually initialize everything, we use that as the callback function for the array for each method. So basically, we're calling this create panel function once for each of these article elements is basically what we're doing. Now the array for each method, I guess I should just pull it up. Let's just open this. I don't know why it's taking so long. So the for each method, it can accept up to 3. So the callback function can accept up to 3 arguments, but we're only using the first 2. So there's the current element being processed in the array and the index of that element in the array. So that's why we have section and index. And because we know these are going to be article elements, they actually inherit from they are instances of the HTML element object. You don't need to worry about that too much, but I'll just quickly show you. That'll be this. What I mean by that quickly, just to show you what I mean. So if I grab one of these article elements, now you can reference the currently selected element in DevTools just by using $0. So if I do console.log dir $0. That lets me kind of expand it and see all the properties on it. And you can see on the elements prototype, it's an instance of HTML element. Some elements have more specific ones, like a div element is an instance of HTML div element object. But in this case, the article element is just HTML element. But as I say, don't worry too much about that for now. But that's why I've used that in this param. This is called JSDoc. It's a way of kind of documenting your JavaScript functions. And then obviously the index is just a number. So the first thing we do is we're using the children property again. Now we know that that's going to return the direct children of this article element, which is obviously an H2 and a paragraph. So I've used what's called destructuring assignment to basically, so this gets the elements at the first and second index. Well, I guess technically I should say the 0th and first index, because arrays are 0 indexed. But it gets the heading and the content and assigns it to those variables. So this heading constant refers to the H2 element, and the content constant refers to the paragraph element. Okay. Now, as we saw before, we need, as is mentioned in these expectations here, we need the where is it? Accordion header buttons have ARIA controls set to the ID of the associated accordion panel content, which we have in our final product here. So ARIA controls is content 0, and then the ID of the paragraph is content 0. And something to mention is that IDs need to be unique. So on the next one, you've got content 1, and then on the next one, you've got content 2. So the way I did that was just created a string content hyphen, and then I appended the index onto the end of it. Now, we only want the first panel to be visible by default, as I said, like we have here. You can see if I refresh the page, only that one is visible. So I created a little constant for this. So basically, arrays are 0 index, so the first item in the array is going to be at index 0. So I've just created this is first panel, and you can see it's a Boolean value, and we set it to the result of this expression. Now, if that looks confusing, you could put parentheses around it if that kind of makes it clearer. But this is always going to be true or false. So for the first article element, then index is going to be 0, so this will be true, otherwise it's going to be false. Next, we set some attributes. So I'm using the dataset property here to just set a data panel attribute. You can see it here on the articles. So I'm just going to be using that as like as a selector later on when we start handling the events. You'll see that in a bit. And what else do I do? So I set the ID attribute on the paragraph, which is in the content constant, to that ID we created a second ago. So that is, just to show you, like here, for example, so each of these paragraphs, we've set the ID of, so that's cool. And then we say, if this isn't the first panel, hide its content. So we're saying if, and then we're using the negation operator. So it's this exclamation point. So we're saying if is not first panel, then we set the hidden property of the paragraph element to true. So what that does is you can see on the second and third paragraphs, they have the hidden attribute set in the HTML, which makes them hidden. So that's nice. And then finally, we replace the heading text with a button. So I use the inner HTML property on the heading element to do that. So I'm setting that to a button element. Now, the things to mention, so we're using a type of button, basically because there's a few different types you can use, like if you're in a form element, you might have type equals submit to specify that it's a submit button. But this is a button that we are just adding interactivity to with JavaScript. It doesn't do anything by default until we add some behavior to it with our script. So that's why we have type equals button. Data heading here, that's, again, I'm going to be using that as a selector when we add our events later on. So don't worry about that too much for now. ARIA controls we set to that ID we created. So that's where we're linking content 0, for example, here with content 0 on the paragraph. ARIA expanded, we're setting to the value of that Boolean attribute, that Boolean constant we created. So to show you what that ends up doing, let's see. So on this first one, it's got ARIA expanded true and ARIA disabled true by default. And then on these other ones, because they're collapsed by default, they're not expanded. ARIA expanded is false and ARIA disabled is false. And then we're using heading.textContent. That basically, that takes what the original, well, I guess I'll show you the HTML. That just takes whatever the original text content was of the heading, and then we're placing it inside the button element as its descriptive label. So that's good. Now, I said I would mention why we're using ARIA disabled, and that is because of the type of accordion I decided to create. So as I said, you know, for the one I've created, we can't collapse. We always want one of the panels to be open, and when it is open, we can't collapse it, so the button doesn't do anything. And that is actually, it's not mentioned in the nutrition card, but these nutrition cards reference the ARIA authoring practices guide. So this is the section here for an accordion, and it specifically mentions under keyboard interaction, I think. No, sorry, it's under ARIA role, states and properties. It says, if the accordion panel associated with an accordion header is visible, and if the accordion does not permit the panel to be collapsed, then the header button element has ARIA disabled set to true. So that's why I've done that. So on this first one here, for example, so it's expanded, and therefore we're not going to let it be collapsed. So we've got ARIA disabled true, which is just signifying that we can't actually activate that. Yeah, so that's our entire function. So basically at the bottom of the script, as I said, we pass that into the for each method on the sections array, which is what actually, that's just converting each of the articles into one of these panels. Now, we haven't actually added any interactivity yet, so if I just disable my event listeners here, I've just realized this is my actually deployed version, so I need to just open up the there's an easier way to do this. I think I can, let me just re-enable that. I can, let's see, the accordion, I think I can remove the event listeners. Let's see, can I do this? Yeah, remove. Okay, so I've just removed the event handlers. So now if I click and press the keys and stuff, nothing happens. So this is where we currently are. We haven't added any functionality. We've just created the structure, which is great. So the next thing on our list is that, but before we can actually add our event handlers, we need some functions for showing and hiding a panel. So let's start with our show function. So it's just got a single parameter here, panel, which again, so what we're going to pass in is one of these article elements. That's what we're actually going to pass into it. That's why the parameter is marked as an HTML element again. So the first thing we want to do is get the actual content and the button element. So we're using the destructuring assignment again to do that. So first we get the direct children of the article, which is going to be the heading and the paragraph. So the paragraph is the content, which is great. But as I said, this children property is only the direct children. So that's just the h2 in the paragraph. So we actually need this button, which is a child of the h2. So once we've assigned our h2 to the heading constant, we then use destructuring assignment again to assign the button element to this button constant. Now, if the panel is already open, we don't want to keep running the JavaScript because there's just no point. We don't want it to do anything. So basically, we use the getAttribute method to get the value of this aria expanded attribute, and if it's already true, like it is here, then we use an empty return statement to just do nothing. So basically, this line here, if this condition is true, then we just return undefined, which is what a function does by default anyway, if you don't specify a return value. So essentially, if isOpen is true, we just return, which means these next lines won't run. So you can see here, if I keep clicking on this, or if I go to it with the keyboard and keep pressing it, you can see that the JavaScript isn't being run over and over again. It's not continually setting the attributes. So that's great. But if that isn't the case, then the function keeps running. So we mark the panel as expanded and disabled by using the setAttribute method. So we set the aria expanded attribute to true, and the aria disabled attribute to true. So to show you that in action, let's select one of these other buttons. So aria expanded is currently false, and aria disabled is currently false. But if we activate it, I'm going to do it with the keyboard actually. That becomes true, and that one becomes true. And we also need to show the content. So we set the hidden property of the content to false, which has the effect of removing that hidden attribute. So just to show you here, let's go into this second article. So you can see the content's got the hidden attribute. When we activate the accordion header, that gets removed, which has the effect of showing the content, which is great. Now we also need a function for hiding the contents of a panel. Now it's basically just the reverse of everything I just showed you. So we get the elements that we need again. We set the attributes to false instead because it's no longer expanded. It'll be collapsed, and it's no longer disabled because once one of these panels is collapsed, we can enable it. And then we set the hidden property to true, which has the effect of adding the hidden attribute and hiding the content, which is great. So with that in mind, we can actually start adding our click handler. So yeah, so let's move on to that. So we have our function here, handle click. I'm just going to take a sip of water actually. I'm not used to speaking this much. That was a good sound. I don't know if the microphone picked that up. Okay, so our handle click function takes in one parameter, which is event, and it is an instance of the event interface, which is, let me look it up for you, just to show you quickly. So yeah, it's the event interface, which represents an event which takes place in the DOM. That automatically gets passed in by the addEventListener method. So just to show you quickly, so this is our handle click function, which we're using as a callback function for the addEventListener method here. Now the addEventListener method automatically passes in the event interface into our handle click function. So the first thing is, I should mention, we're actually using a technique called event delegation, because you'll notice here that we've only attached one click event handler. So because we're dealing with these button elements that have been dynamically added to the page, this saves us from having to add a click handler to this button and this button and this button. So it makes our lives easier, and it's also better for performance because we're not adding 3 separate click handlers that do the same thing. So what we actually do is we're listening for clicks on this outer like accordion container, and then we're just going to filter the clicks. So we only want our function to run if one of these buttons was clicked. If anything else was clicked, nothing happens. It just has the default behavior, it doesn't do anything. So the way we do that is so the event target is that's the element that actually fired the event. So like, for example, if I were to click right now on this bit of text here, like on the paragraph, that means that the paragraph is going to be the event target. Or like if I click, let's see, if I clicked anywhere inside this accordion, but like not on one of the actual elements, if I click like here, then the accordion itself is going to be the event target. But if we click on a button, that is going to be the event target. That's the element that fired the click event. And the event, the events bubble. So like if you click on the button element, that event bubbles all the way up to the accordion element, which is why we're able to listen on the accordion itself. There's other great explanations of event delegation, which I can link to. I also link to it in my blog post, which you can reference. But anyway, we're using the matches method. So the matches method just lets you check if an element matches a CSS selector. It's a bit like the is method in jQuery, if you're familiar with that. So we're saying if the event target, so if the element that was clicked does not match the data heading attribute, then just return. So basically, if the thing we clicked on does not have this data heading attribute, just do nothing. Just so all the rest of this function does not run. But if we did click on a button, so the first thing we do is we want to get the panel that was activated. So at this point, we filtered our clicks down to just the button elements. But if you remember our show and hide functions, they take the entire article, not just the button. So we've realized, okay, so we've clicked on this button, but we need this article. So there's a method for that, which is great. There's the closest method, which it basically, starting from the element itself, it traverses up the DOM until it finds the first element that meets this CSS selector. So I'm saying, once I've clicked on the button, get me the closest element that matches data panel. So, which is obviously this article element here. So that's great. And we also want to get all of the other panels so that we can hide those. And to do that, we use the array filter method. So the array filter method, a little voice crack there for you. So the array filter method takes in a callback function, and basically you want to return true if the element should be included in the array, and you want to return false if it shouldn't. So we're saying basically we're returning the result of this expression. So section is not equal to this panel. So we're basically saying, if I were to write this out in longer form for you, which I will do very quickly actually. So it's a bit like saying, if section is equal to this panel, then return false, otherwise return true. If that makes it a bit clearer for you, hopefully. So at this point, our array, so this other panels array, will contain the 2 other panels that weren't activated. And then we just call the show method, passing in the panel that was activated, and then we use the hide. Then we loop through the other panels using the array for each method, and then pass in the hide function as our callback function, which will hide all of the other panels. So that's this behavior that we've got here taken care of for us, which is really nice. And it will also work with the keyboard because we use native button elements. It means that the well, it won't do the arrow keys, which is mentioned here. We have to add that manually, but native button elements will work with enter and space, and also shift and tab. So those parts are taken care of for us already. So we can press tab to tab between them. We can press shift tab to move backwards, and pressing the space bar, or if I go to the next one, the enter key, that all works for us just because we use native button elements and not stupid div elements. So that's great. So all we need to do now is add in the arrow key functionality for cycling the headers. So that's what we will do next. So I'm going to, so to do this, instead of click events, we're going to listen for keydown events. Just to show you, I will look it up in the MDN web docs. So the keydown event is fired on the document. So the document is like the entire, just to show you, it's like it's this entire thing, basically. It's not actually the HTML element, and it's not the doc type either. You can't actually see it rendered here, but it's a step above that. Actually, I could show you in the console quickly. Let's go document. You can see it's kind of selecting everything, and then the document contents are inside it. But anyway, the keydown event is fired when a key is pressed. So that's it. That's what it does. So I guess the first thing I should mention is that we're wrapping all of this function contents inside these two little bits here. So basically, I'll mention the bottom bit first. So when we call event.preventDefault, the prevent default method, that basically prevents the default action of pressing the button. So for example, if it was a form and we were listening for the submit event, if I called event.preventDefault, that would prevent the form from submitting because that's the default behavior. So that's what that does. And at the top here, the default prevented property, well, as it says right there, it returns true if prevent default was invoked, otherwise false. So basically what these two bits in combination do is, because basically if you have one of these headers in focus, so I guess a good way to show you is if I make this page just a bit longer. So let's set min height, I don't know, 200 VH. So now the page is a bit taller, right? So normally if you press the arrow keys, they scroll the page, right? And I thought, and I may be wrong about this, maybe it would have been better not to disable this. So if anyone knows better, please let me know. But basically, without that bit of code, it means that when you're using the arrow keys to navigate, it would also be scrolling the page, which I think is a bit jarring. So that's what those bits of code do. But next, so the nutrition card says that the up and down keys cycle headers when a header is focused. So that means if anything else is in focus, like these links, pressing the up and down keys is just doing the default behavior. It's not cycling between the headers. That's not what we want. We only want to do it when one of these headers is in focus. So that's what that means. So we need to check for that first. So again, I'm creating a Boolean value and assigning it to this isHeading constant. So the document object has this active element property, which basically just refers, the document.active element is whichever element is currently in focus. So we're again using the matches method. So we're basically saying if the element currently in focus matches this CSS selector data heading, which is what we have on each of our button elements, then isHeading will be true, otherwise it will be false. So if there isn't a heading in focus, we just return again. So that means that if no heading is in focus, all the rest of this function does not get run. It just stops there. But if we do have one of these in focus, well, I suppose I should say first, the next thing we want to do is we want to limit this to the up and down keys. So say there is a heading in focus, we go, okay, great, so we're going to move on and do the next bit. But we only want to do the next part of this function if the up or down key was pressed. So if I press like left or right or G or space, well, I guess space is already handled, but you know, any other button, we don't want it to do anything. We only want the up and down arrow keys to work. So that's what we do next. So we're creating some more booleans and assigning them to these constants. So we can do that by checking the event key property. And I'm actually checking for two values. So most modern browsers use the values arrow up and arrow down, but some older browsers use the string values up and down instead. So I'm checking for both. So like here, for example, I'm saying if the event key is arrow up, or if it's just up, then set this to true, otherwise set it to false, and then the same for the down keys. And then I'm saying if the key that was pressed is not the up arrow and it's not the down arrow either, then just return. So we're saying, first we're saying, is there one of these heading buttons in focus? And if not, just skip. But if it is, we're saying, okay, cool. So we do have one of these buttons in focus. However, did the user press anything other than the up or down keys? If they did, we just say, nope, sorry, stopping there. So all the rest of this doesn't run. But assuming they did press the up or down arrow key, we want to move them to the next accordion header. So we're going, okay, cool. So the first thing we do is call the query selector all method on the accordion. Now, you may be used to using the query selector all method on the document, but you can actually call it on element instead. So like we know that these headings are inside the accordion. So what, like, this isn't a huge page, but like why search the entire document when we know we're limited to this little section here? Just makes sense. So basically what that does is it gives us an array of all of these button elements. So that's great. Now we know one of those buttons is in focus, which is, yeah, so we know one of them is currently in focus, and we need to find out which one that is, and we need the index of that one. The reason why we need the index is because we've got our array, right? So we want to go, okay, well, if this one is in focus, the second one, we need to know which index in the array we're at, because if we need to go to the previous one, then we need to go at an index one lower than that, and if we want to go to the next one, we need to add one to that index. That's why. Now there's an array method called findIndex, which is a bit like the filter method before. So we're just saying return heading equals document active element. So basically find the index of the heading that is currently the document active element, or in other words, it's the one that's in focus. I will just show you again if it's clearer. So we're saying if heading is equal to document active element, return true, otherwise return false. So that's exactly the same. If you find that clearer, that's absolutely fine. But that's what this line here is doing. It's just returning the value of that expression. It's the same thing. And then all we have to do is shift the focus to the next heading. So I'm basically saying, if it's the up arrow, then get the heading at, an index one lower, so index -1, and then call the focus method, which is what moves the focus. And then if it was the down arrow, move the focus down. Now, the nutrition card does not specify this, but on the actual ARIA guide, it says, for example, if focus is on the last accordion header, either does nothing or moves focus to the first header. And like with the up arrow, if you're on the first header, it either does nothing or it skips you back round to the last one. Just for the sake of simplicity, I decided to make it do nothing. So if you keep pressing up, nothing happens. But notice that we don't get any, let me just clear that. Notice that if I get to the bottom and keep pressing down, there's no errors in the console. And if I get to the top and keep pressing up, there's no errors. Now the reason we don't get errors is because I've used the optional chaining operator, which is this question mark plus the dot. Because if I were to just call the method normally, we'd get errors. And that is because if we are at the top of the array, so we're at the beginning of the array, we're at index 0, right? If you then try to subtract, if you try to access the element that's at index -1, so basically it's like we're trying to do, so index would be 0, so we're trying to get 0 minus 1, which is just -1. We're trying to get the heading at that index, but there isn't one, it's just undefined. So you're then trying to call the focus method on undefined, which doesn't exist. So we would get some errors in the console. But using the optional chaining operator, it basically says, does this exist? If so, call the focus method. Otherwise, it skips this focus part. It doesn't do anything. And it's the same for this next bit. So there's 3 elements in our headings array, right? So there's 1 button, there's 2 buttons, there's 3 buttons. So that means the indices are 0, 1, 2. So if you get to the last heading, so the index is going to be 2. So you're then trying to do 2 plus 1, which is 3, and there is no heading at that index. So again, this would fail. But because we're using the optional chaining operator, it means we don't get any errors. It only tries to call the focus method if this actually exists. So that's nice. Yeah, and then all you have to do then is add your event handlers. So this is where we listen for click events on the accordion and then call our handle click function. Well, we don't call it directly here. That wouldn't work, but we pass it in as a callback function. So we're basically saying run that function whenever a click occurs inside the accordion element. And then again, for the keydown event, we're running our handle keydown function. Yeah, and that's that. I hope this makes more sense. It may have been better to do this as like an actual walkthrough, but maybe I'll do that for one of the future components. But hopefully that all makes sense. I forgot to go over the styles. So yeah, I'm going to do that. So most of the styles, so I'm kind of building this as one big project where I'm referencing all of these components. So whoops. So there's like a home page, and I'll be referencing all of them. But specifically, well, I guess I should say, so most of the styles, honestly, are just for like centering the page and, you know, setting the light and dark mode and the fonts and stuff. But specifically for this component, I will show you what's going on. You may also notice that I've switched to Firefox. It's just because Firefox has a color picker tool, like more easily built in. So that'll be handy. So just to show you, oh, I guess I'm also going to close Edge down. Okay, so first things first, I've selected all elements that have the data heading attribute, which is going to be all of our actual buttons. And really all these styles do is just make it look less like a button, because I kind of just wanted them to still look like headings. But I guess the most important thing to note is that I have not removed the focus outline. So this outline you see here, that always needs to be visible. It's one of the key accessibility considerations, so we haven't removed that. You could, you are allowed to customize it if you want to, and just make it look a bit different to match the theme of your application. but in it, as long as it's still visually obvious. But in this case, I just decided to stick with the default because it's accessible out of the box, so it makes sense. Next, so this is pretty cool. So I've also selected the buttons that have the ARIA expanded attribute, and depending on whether the value is true or false, we use this before pseudo element and the content property to set a little disclosure triangle. So if it's false, meaning that it's collapsed, the arrow is pointing to the right, and if it's open, the arrow is pointing down. So that's what controls these little arrows, which is really cool. And finally, I've selected when the buttons have ARIA disabled set to true, and I've kind of marked them as being like visually disabled. So the first things I'll mention is for mouse users, you can see that so like the cursor is normally just like the pointer, but when you hover over one, it's got this like not allowed cursor, so that's just a nice little touch. And then you'll also notice that it's grayed out. So yeah, that's specifically mentioned in the guide, in the official documentation. So it says, in addition to setting the ARIA disabled attribute, authors should change the appearance, grayed out, etc. to indicate that the item has been disabled. Now, the way I've done that is I've actually set the opacity a bit lower. The reason why I've done that instead of setting an explicit color value is because it will work for both light and dark mode. So one important thing to note though is that I had to make sure that the resulting color values were still meeting the minimum contrast ratio. So if I go to this page, it says so to meet the minimum contrast requirements, the ratio has to be at least 4.5 to 1. So just to show you, this is why I needed Firefox, because it just makes my life easier a bit. So if I just use this color picker, I can check what the actual like resulting color is. So it's this A6, A6, A6. And what is the background? The background is 22222. Okay, so I'm actually going to open up this wave tool, which lets you check some values. So the background color we said was 22222. Well, I guess I don't know if it lets you do the shorthand. Let me just try 3. Okay, cool. And then the foreground color I think we said was A6, A6, A6. So you can see we're meeting the minimum contrast ratio. For normal size text, it's failing the specialized ratio, which is that's. I mean, in an ideal world, actually, we would want to pass that. But as long as you meet the minimum requirements, that's okay. For most applications, the enhanced requirements is more for like really specialized applications with like a specific user base, or for something like maybe a government type application. You're going to want it to be, accessible, like super accessible. Which, as I say, would be the ideal for everything. But in this case, we are meeting the minimum requirements, which is good. Now, the next thing I will do is if I actually just switch my system to light mode, just to show you for this as well. So the background, I believe, is just pure white. Yeah, that's fine. And let's check what this gray is. So it's 656565. So let's open up this tool again. So the background is white, and then we said 656565. Let's see. Yeah, so same again. We failed on the like enhanced ratio, but we've met the minimum contrast requirements, so that is good. Yeah, I think that's it. Mainly for these styles and stuff. So I hope that makes sense, and I'll say again, thanks for watching.